Dr. Bruce Epperly is a teacher, pastor, spiritual guide, prolific writer, lecturer, retreat leader, and also a Reiki teacher. He's the author of over 70 books, including Finding God in Suffering, A Journey with Job, Process Theology, Embracing Adventure with God, Become Fire, Guideposts for Spiritual Pilgrims, One World, Process Theology, and the Lord's Prayer, even a book called Piglet's Process, where he looks at process theology through the lens of Winnie the Pooh and Winnie Pooh's friends in the forest there. And I met Bruce when I was a doctoral student at Claremont School of Theology, getting my doctorate in process studies. And Bruce was a visiting professor for a semester, and I had the privilege of taking 2 classes with him. So I know we are in good hands tonight, listening to what Bruce has to say about these 2 amazing thinkers, Alfred North Whitehead and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. So with that, Bruce, take it away.
Well, so good to see you again, Sherry. I will just simply say good evening to the pilgrims of the future, which is you. Good evening to the pilgrims of the future, as Teilhard says, or adventurers in ideas, as Whitehead says. And I think always when you begin a conversation, and my companion is sitting over there, you could perhaps see my dog Tucker, who is a highly evolved companion animal. Uh, it should always begin with thanks. I want to thank Sherry, who's really piloting the Center for Process Studies and Cobb Institute in good and creative ways. For Jared, who's managing the production of this and who is becoming one of the best young theologians I know of. You're a young theologian too, Sherry, so I don't want to exclude you on this. I always give thanks to the good ancestors, to the trinity of my Claremont professors, John Cobb, who is nearing his 100th year, to Dave Griffin, to Bernie Loomer, who shaped my faith in an adult perspective. Want to thank Jay, who I don't know if Jay is here tonight, but he wrote a wonderful essay, and some of it even related to my text on Whitehead and Teilhard. But Jay and I were roommates now 45, 46, 47 years ago, and he's always been a bright star for me. As a former employee of process studies, I was an employee for process studies 46 years ago. And I was the biographical assistant for Victor Lowe, who wrote the definitive biography of Alfred North Whitehead. Well worth the read. And I'm grateful for the center and its impact on my life as a graduate student, and then through the programs that have been offered in the 40-some years since that time. As Dag Hammarskjöld would say, for all that has been, thanks. For all that shall be, yes. And I want to talk a little bit about how this book came to be, and then I'll talk a little bit about the book itself, and then leave the conversation to you. And I won't claim to know everything about either Whitehead or Teilhard, and you may stump me with some questions, and I'll certainly let you know if you do, and we'll pursue them at a later time. Every book has a history. Every book has a history. The origins of this text occurred in my 70th year. I know that I look much younger than that, but I'm now past my 70th year. And I had an inspiration. And the direct source of this inspiration was the Christogenesis conference that on Whitehead and Teilhard. Andrew Davis, who some of you know, and Ilya Delio put together a fine conference of world-class scholars. Didn't you present a paper there, Sherry?
Yes, I did. Yes.
There was a world-class scholar there in that case. I didn't participate in that, but it inspired me. There had not been written yet a book on Whitehead and Teilhard that was full length. Nobody had written one, and people were talking about that. And I said, well, why not me? And of course, there's a history. Every book has a history of your own personal life. I'm of a certain spirit that you never write out of anything you're not passionate about. I discovered Whitehead and Plato the same year, 1973. Good Lord, that long ago. In a seminar that was taught by Richard Keedy, who was a graduate of Claremont, one of Klobb's students, just newly minted PhD at San Jose State University. And he taught an introduction to process theology that included a bit of Teilhard, but mostly Whitehead. And again, there's been a divide between the Whiteheadians and the Teilhardians. The Whiteheadians were popularized mostly by Protestant folks, and the Teilhardians mostly Catholic. I gravitated toward the Protestant side and studied Whitehead rather than Teilhard, but I also appreciated the work of some of my colleagues, John Hott, Jack Hott, and Tom King at Georgetown, where I spent 20 years. And also, of course, Elia Delio, who I think has done some of the most creative work out there on Teilhard and so many other things. I realized that in working on a book on Whitehead and Plato, and Plato, that's coming up, my Whitehead Plato book's coming up, but a book on Whitehead and Teilhard, I'd be opening a spiral and closing a circle that became a spiral of something I started at 50 years ago that's still alive for me and hopefully will evolve into the future. I titled the book The God of Tomorrow, because that's a phrase that Teilhard uses. Teilhard believes we shouldn't focus just on the God of the past, but we should be looking toward the God of tomorrow. The God that is, as Elia Delio says, not yet. The adventurous God, whose fire is found in every burning bush and every cell of your body. This God of tomorrow is not the changeless, backward-looking God rooted in the past, but the God who invites us to the future. Alive and moving with mercies, as the author of Lamentations says, that are new every morning. Now, while they have different nuances and perhaps different views of divine power and the possibility of achievement of the beloved planet, Whitehead and Teilhard have much in common. Teilhard, I suspect, was more optimistic or hopeful of what he called Christogenesis, the emergence of Christ being all in all, than Whitehead. Teilhard saw a certain lure, a strong lure, toward the achievement of this Omega Christ. Whitehead's not so sure about that. Whitehead sees a variety of long-term scenarios, with no one scenario or completion guaranteed. Teilhard was influenced by biology and paleontology, Whitehead by physics and mathematics. Both saw a progressive movement in the universe, an adventure of ideas and human experience for Whitehead that keeps luring us step by step forward with starts and stops. And certainly for Teilhard, the inner Christ that was leaning toward, again, what Elia Delio says, the not yet God. In this particular book, and probably it's true for my work in general, I focused on the common ground more than differences and aimed at reflecting on the broad currents of their thoughts rather than minutiae. I also looked at the two thinkers through the lens of spirituality, since both philosophers embraced spirituality as a source of metaphysical truth. And hence the subtitle, metaphysics, mysticism, and mission. Both saw the essential connection between our worldviews and our ethics. And both were open to the mystic and also to personal and corporate mission. Well, I'm going to briefly talk about those three elements: metaphysics, mysticism, and mission. As I said earlier, Teilhard is more goal-directed than Whitehead and sees the universe aiming toward an omega point, a Christogenesis, the apotheosis of this world we're currently living in, the noosphere. Whitehead, the future's more open-ended. Both of them have a vision of the universe heading toward wholeness. For Whitehead, in that wonderful comment, the teleology, the aim of the universe, is toward the production of beauty. The aim of the universe is toward the production of beauty. Well, they have some common metaphysical ground, and I'll just mention a few areas in common. The first is interdependent. Both of them see the world as an intimate, interconnected, dynamic fabric or fountain of relationships. Everything is everywhere all the time, so says Whitehead at one point. I think it almost became the title of a movie. Both of them believe that experience is universal. Teilhard speaks of a within of things, that even within the stone, I've used the term within already twice here, even within the stone there is a life force. Matter is inspired and spirit is embodied. They both see value as universal. Human beings, although I believe Teilhard has a more anthropocentric view than Whitehead, human beings are not the only value in the universe. And that's a really important thing when we'll come to talk about mission, because mission has to include more than us. Both of them see in different degrees a universality of purpose. Working through a world of freedom and accident and entropy, there is a movement. And each in their own way see God as the primary source of evolution and growth, the lure that moves creation forward, part and whole. More than Teilhard, Whitehead sees God as most moved mover in two ways. Most moved emotionally through feeling the universe, and most moved causally as luring it forward. An interdependent, experiential, value-oriented, purposive, divinely inspired universe. Mysticism. Whitehead's mysticism is underrated. I have in mind a very short book someday that I'll write on Whitehead's Jesus. I've come to the conclusion that that in some ways the last few chapters of Process and Reality are basically Christology. They're basically his Jesus that he talks about in various parts of his book, Process, Reality, and Elsewhere, is writ large in the last couple chapters, and it's an underrated part of Whitehead's writings. Both of them saw mysticism as essential to the human experience, and that wonderful Whiteheadian quote, philosophy is deep down mystical. God is present in all things, and God is present in your life. We don't live in a godless universe, but a God-filled universe. God is encountered in all things. Teilhard talks about We can find God through matter as well as in matter. Both of them would say that we're all mystics, but don't know it. And oftentimes we close our senses and our heart, and when we do so, we turn toward individualism and self-interest and constrict our vision when in fact the holy is coming to us in every experience. But they don't see, neither one of them see mysticism as self-enclosed or otherworldly. That mysticism is profoundly sensate as well as apophatic. Now, I define the terms that, well, sometimes people say cataphatic or sensate and apophatic. Mysticism is not just about the God beyond God, as Teilhard would say, and Paul Tillich later. Mysticism is about the God within all. You can see God every moment of your life. Jeff Long will be speaking in a couple months, or next month, I guess. And of course, there's that wonderful Hindu phrase, tattavamasi, meaning thou art that, you are that. The divine comes to us in all things through both Whitehead and Teilhard. You cannot move a stone but find God there, or as the Gospel of Thomas 77 says, cleave the wood and I am there. Mysticism is what later on Rufus Jones, the great Quaker mystic and teacher of Howard Thurman, would say for both people is affirmative. It affirms the world in which we live. And in some sense, mystics, and we're all mystics, are people who can push the world further ahead. It's forward and not backward looking. In some ways, and I'm thinking about this these days, the Franciscan spirit of sensate spirituality, and read Francis' Canticle to the Creatures, praise be you, the heavens, praise be you, brother sun, praise be you, sister moon. Both of them have a sensate spirituality that in looking at each one of you, and I'm trying to scroll here and I see some faces here of people I know like Paul Nancaro. We've done some writing together ages ago. Some of you people, when you look at each face, even on Zoom, you're seeing the holy speak to us through every face. And then comes mission. In some sense, both thinkers are very biblical, even though neither one of them is confined to Scripture. Both of them believe that mysticism leads to mission. You perhaps remember, for some of you who've read the First Testament or the Old Testament, as some call it, the encounter of Isaiah at the temple. Does anyone remember that from Isaiah 6, 1 through 8? Isaiah goes into the temple and he sees the living God, and seraphs surround him, and they say, holy, holy, holy. The whole world is full of God's glory. And certainly at the time, Isaiah is rather gobsmacked by the whole thing and protests his sinfulness. And then the divine one says, whom shall I send? Mysticism is connected to mission. If you look at some of the great mystics, they were people who were activists. I think of Teresa of Avila, who says, God has no hands but yours. Or Thomas Merton, who sees the unity of life walking down the street in Louisville, Kentucky, and then becomes an activist protesting the Vietnam War. Or Dorothy Day, who says that I shall talk to people as if they're angels, and then becomes a real pain in the butt for everyone in the community because she sees a world that could be, and asks, as Robert Kennedy said, why not? Why not that world? Our vision of God, both Teilhard and Whitehead believed, shapes our values. That wonderful quote from Religion in the Making are, one's character is formed by one's deepest understandings of the holy, one's character. And the vision of God that both people said, I'm talking about the broad spectrum here of both thinkers, is relational, active, invitational, and calls us forward, and is both receiving and giving all the time. I've been working again a little bit with Whitehead and Franciscan folks these days. And one of the terms, and I think Iliadilio coined it, she's certainly helped me in my Franciscan understanding, the humility of God. God is humble in God's non-coercive love, something very much popularized by Tom Oord, if any of you know Tom Oord's work. And also, God is humble in God's presentation of ideals. God never forces God's self upon us. God lures us forward. And God is, as Whitehead would say, the fellow sufferer who understands. I'll just say a few more words and then we'll enter into conversation. Teilhard has this expansive universal vision and truly does believe that we're heading for an omega point. We're truly heading toward the full birth of Christ in our world. Now, I struggle with that a good deal. Yesterday, the Center for Process Study sponsored a wonderful talk by my colleague and friend Brian McLaren. I don't know if any of you know who he is, about life after doom. Good Lord, if you read the first chapter of that, you'll need a little Prozac or something, a little scotch or something. Brian is not optimistic in some ways about where we're going, but he sees hope in small acts of doing what you can right in front of you to be the hands and feet of God. Whitehead is probably somewhere in between McLaren and Teilhard. Whitehead doesn't see the coming of Christ as something fully ordained, or the coming of the fullness of apotheosis of the world is fully ordained. There are many possible futures ahead of us. And of course, that wonderful line from Religion in the Making, in which Whitehead says, the world lives by its incarnation of God. God's present in our lives, and the world turns toward it or away from it, but God keeps offering possibilities. Not fully knowing what's going to happen, but still offering possibilities. At the end of the day, both of us, both Teilhard and Whitehead, and this will be my interpretation of Teilhard on this point, do believe there's a certain openness to the future. Teilhard's pretty clear, in spite of his strong view of where we're going, that you and I have a role. You and I have a role in embodying the Christ in the world. We are part of that Christogenesis, which, by the way, does not lead to uniformity, but greater particularity, greater individuality. The one and the many are balanced in an interdependence. I tend to myself privilege a more Whiteheadian view on this point, which I use the term the moral and spiritual arcs, having gotten the moral arc from Theodore Parker, the great Unitarian pastor and abolitionist of the 19th century, and the spiritual arc is kind of my add-on, that those are moving through history, but their achievement involves us. Both thinkers believe that the divine lures us toward horizons we don't yet imagine. And both thinkers say to each one of us here, all 60 of us here, we're part of it. We're part of creating the future Christ. We're part of contributing something to God's future activity in the world, as Whitehead would say. We, one act, one thought, make all the difference. And being a practical theologian by discipline as well as by inclination, I've spent 45 years in teaching or administration at seminaries and universities, and 45 years pastoring churches or being a university chaplain, doing both almost always at the same time. And my sense is for each one of us can, quoting Mother Teresa, Saint Teresa of Calcutta, as well as Whitehead, can do something beautiful for God, that each one of us has a role. The Jewish tradition of mysticism says that, and Heschel, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel is sort of the source of this in many ways, that when you save the world, when you save one person, it's as if you saved the universe. I would say when you save one moment, it's as if you saved the universe. One moment at a time. That's where I think Brian McLaren and I converge, on that sense that we do what's in front of us regardless of what happens. We stand for the right as we understand it, regardless of what happens. So just to bring it home, these thinkers have a futuristic vision. These thinkers believe that every nook and cranny of the universe has experience and value and experiences the holy. These thinkers believe that the divine within is within us, and that we are partners with the non-human world. Teilhard is more anthropocentric than Whitehead, but he believes in some sense that we need that world of rocks and trees and sparrows and pangolin. We need that world for the Christogenesis too. So I open it up. I tend as a thinker not to worry about the small details. I think what we need is not so much minutiae, although some people should do the minutiae, but the large picture, and then some of us will fill in the blanks. Well, thank you very much for being here. And thank you, Sherry, for inviting me, and Jared for running things here. It is just a joy. Thank you.